So welcome. My name is Dr. Megan Miller. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Success in the Graduate School, and happy to be with you all today to go over some tips on presenting your research to a public audience in a poster session. So we set up this session with one primary purpose to help grad students prepare for the upcoming Research in the State poster session, but intend for this to be helpful for any poster presentation you're doing, especially if it's a presentation outside of your academic discipline. So presenting to a much more diverse audience. So who here today is planning to present Research in the State later this month? So about half of you, a few of you. Great. So anyone, I know Andy presented last year and she'll be contributing in our session in a bit. And has anyone here presented in Research in the State previously? Presented last year, 2 years ago? Great. So everyone else is new. Wonderful. Great. Well, some of what I'll cover today will focus on that event specifically, but can be applicable. Yes.
To be welcome for me, like a QR code.
Okay. Well, I'll get your name and then we'll make sure we get you in there. So, but again, yeah, we'll tailor this to that event specifically. But again, what we'll cover today will be applicable to poster presentations and other public audiences, but can also apply to when you're giving a poster presentation in your own discipline too. I think it will be beneficial in those settings as well. So first, just a little bit about Research in the State for those of you who are presenting, but if you're not, just to give you a little more information to be familiar with that event. This year, if you're not presenting, you're more than welcome and encouraged to attend and just have on your radar for if you're not graduating in the near future, so think about presenting next year. So Research in the State is a poster presentation session that is hosted by the Graduate School and Graduate Student Council. This is university-wide, so the Graduate Student Council coordinates a couple of events in the academic year, this event in the fall, and then in the spring they do an even broader research forum that involves poster and oral presentation sessions. Research in the State is just poster presentations, open to students from across disciplines, and so with that you're presenting to a very diverse audience. You're presenting, again, not just to other students and faculty in your home department, but to students, faculty, staff from all across the university. It's people who are not experts in what you do. And in particular, in this event, we ask students to talk about how your work that you're doing in your grad program is valuable to the state of Kansas. This does not mean it needs to be something unique to the state of Kansas. And I know a challenge we encounter often with this event, especially for students who are not in disciplines in the College of Agriculture, which is, I think, the very obvious, well, we're in an ag state. I'm doing research in an ag discipline. Of course, it's relevant to the state of Kansas. But when we interact with students who are in other disciplines, well, this doesn't matter for Kansas, right? It's not something that's particularly special to the state of Kansas. By this, we do not mean that it has to be something unique to the state of Kansas. But really, I think that the best way to think about it is how can you talk about your work? How do you explain the importance of your work? Or why should our state legislators, our lawmakers, and why should the citizens of the state of Kansas care about what you're doing? So it's really, in the big picture, it's not necessarily something that is impactful just to Kansas. Your work probably has broader implications. And when a couple examples I like to give that are to illustrate, this is not something unique to Kansas, but we've often had students from civil engineering who are doing transportation related research. Roads don't only exist in Kansas, right? Transportation is everywhere, but they will tie this into their own work and discuss their own work in terms of what are the fatality rates in Kansas due to speeding related accidents or accidents related to other aspects related to our roads and transportation. Another good example is cancer research. Cancer doesn't only happen in Kansas, right? But we've had a number of students in biology, biochemistry, different disciplines who are doing cancer related research who will talk about, my work focuses on this specific type of cancer. These are the prevalence rates in Kansas, or this specific type of cancer is the X leading cause of death among men or women or a certain age group in the state of Kansas. So how do you make your work relevant to our state? So throughout our session today, I'll be referring to Andy, who's here, who was a presenter last year. I also have some video recordings, or a video recording from one of last year's presenters who was able to be here, but he recorded some comments, and so I'll be sharing those as well to hear from them about their research in the state experience, but also to have them share some guidance on how they were successful. I don't know if I said this earlier, but specifically Indy and Tucker, who I have on recording, they were selected as winners of our research in the state event. So we select from this event here at K-State 10 graduate students who will then in the spring go to our state capitol building and present the research posters there. That the event there is the Capitol Graduate Research Summit. We coordinate that in partnership with other Regents institutions in Kansas, so KU Med, Wichita State, Pittsburgh State, Emporia State, and Fort Hays State. So each of our schools bring a select number of graduate students to the Capitol. They present their research posters, and we invite the state legislators to come to that poster session to communicate to the legislators what you all are doing, why it's important, why graduate education is important, why the research that is being done in higher ed is important to many of the issues that they are discussing in their subcommittees and that they're making decisions about for our state. So first I'll turn to Andy to share as I pull up the video from Tucker. Andy, could you just share with the group what was your experience participating in research in the state? What did you gain from that experience? And then when you went to the Capitol, similarly, what was the value for you? Because you all will have in your graduate experience, maybe you've already had some of the experience to go to a professional conference in your field of study, but this is a little bit different experience. So what was the value for you to participate in these events?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Hi guys, I'm Andy. I just moved up front so you don't have to turn your heads to talk to me all the way in the back. But it was an amazing opportunity for me to develop my presentation skills. And more than just that, usually in the agronomy department, we present to other people in agronomy. So it's different when you present to the rest of the university. So it was a really neat experience for me to learn how to translate my research in common terms that people from other areas would also benefit from that, could also understand what was my message. So I did learn a lot, and those preparation sections help a lot. I participated for 3MT too, and that was a huge help. So every time you see Megan posting something, you can come because it's good. But yeah, it was a really great opportunity for me to connect with other students. There are people that stopped by my poster that we're still in touch today, a year from that date. And it was truly amazing. And after we got the opportunity to go to Topeka. So we got to talk to the legislators which was amazing as well. It was a really nice opportunity. I could never imagine that I would talk to them. And it also opens up doors for us for possible partnerships with the university and the legislators. And pretty much every single research, you can translate them into something that could benefit the entire state and could be interesting for the legislators. And they truly enjoy stopping by the posters, so it was a very nice environment. I was feeling a little bit nervous at first, but they were super approachable, so. I really recommend, like this year, I'm just not participating, but I will K-Grad. I'm already saving the data for K-Grad. But yeah, it's really neat because you get to look at your data from a different perspective. And sometimes even terms that for you can be normal, like for me, inoculant, just a random term, but inoculant is something that I deal every single day because I work with fungi. But when I was practicing, I think it was Megan or someone else that told me, what is inoculant? I never thought about that. I was like, oh, I gotta say, what is inoculant? Because people that are not in the agronomy or like the biology field, they might not be familiar with what an inoculant is. So now when I talk to people outside of my field, I know how to approach them. I know how to translate what I'm doing. So it was one of the best experiences I had here at K-State.
Thanks, Cindy.
You're welcome.
For me, was the first poster presentation I did. I did it in the second semester of my graduate program. I had gotten enough research done early on that I could present that early. So I feel like that was actually pretty advantageous to me, because the important thing to keep in mind about your audience for this is, even though you are presenting graduate level research, you are not presenting to people in your field. This is, in my opinion, primarily a communication based competition. It's how do you communicate your research in a way that the layman or the scientists from other fields can understand your research. So if you're getting super down into the weeds in the same way that you might get deep into the nitty gritty, like when you're presenting at a pet food conference or a human nutrition conference, or a neuroscience conference or anything like that, you're not going to be as effective, because people are going to be overwhelmed by what you're doing. They're not going to understand it, and you're just not going to perform well. You are talking to someone who does not understand your field, and so you have to be able to communicate it in a way that doesn't dumb it down, but it simplifies it. It makes it easier for them to understand. And so I felt like I was in a good position coming into this research in the state, because I had never really practiced or learned how to do that overly scientific communication yet. When I did this, it was still very much the way I talked about my research at the time was still very conversational and very it was the same way that I talked about my research to my parents or my friends or people outside of my field. And so I do think that was a pretty big contributor into why I did as well as I did. The next question is, what are some tips that you can give to the presenters to
Tucker in a little bit. So one big part we'll focus on today is really how to be successful in these events, in research in the state or other similar poster sessions. So one just basic logistics to follow is being familiar with the logistics of the event. Know your audience. Design a poster that's both engaging and understandable, and we'll talk about how to present yourself professionally as well. So in terms of logistics for research in the state, with any event, just be familiar with what's the layout going to be. Is there certain dimensions you need to follow for your poster? For research in the state, we require a poster of 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall. these are the dimensions we require for the Capital Graduate Research Summit. So if you're selected for that event, you want to have your poster ready for that event as well. You should be prepared to orally present your poster in about 3 minutes or less. I think this is a good practice to follow for any poster presentation, no matter who your audience is. Who has presented in a poster session before? Anywhere. So about half of you, great. So for those of you that have, the context of a poster session, it's usually it's very different, of course, than an oral presentation session, right? When one person is talking, everyone's sitting and listening. Poster sessions are very engaging and active. They're very conversational. One thing Tucker kind of mentioned there, where it can be really more of a discussion, and it's great for you to have a 1 to 3 minute oral presentation prepared, so that when someone comes to your poster, you're ready to give an overview of your work. But that doesn't mean you have to go through that spiel every time. It's not uncommon that you'll start talking about your research and a visitor at your poster might interject with some questions. So you kind of have to be ready to think on your feet in those contexts. With this particular event, Research in the State, we will have 3 or 4 judges that will come around to your poster. They will not necessarily all come together at one time. So that is meant to mimic the experience you'd have at a professional poster conference or poster session, where they're going around the poster session. You'll have a number of people stopping by, which is a great professional development experience, because you get to do your presentation multiple times, as opposed to giving a talk at a conference where you do it once and you're done. Of course, you should practice it multiple times, either in either format, but in a poster session, you just get to have a lot more conversation. It's repeated practice of talking about your research. Our event is also open to the public, so it's open to other K-Staters. If community members would like to come in, they can. So again, meant to mimic that experience you'd have at a professional conference of interacting with a variety of people to share your research. And I didn't mention it, if at any time you all have questions throughout, please stop me and address questions. So one major item that I think both Tucker and Andy noted was knowing your audience, which I alluded to at the beginning of this session too, that your audience for Research in the State for any event will vary. So you need to know who your audience is to most effectively target or shape your presentation. It's just like when you are applying for a job, your resume should be shaped to that job. You want to connect with that audience as best as you can. That means you can't give the same presentation to different audiences. So one question we get sometimes for Research in the State or K-Grad, the spring event that Andy mentioned, these events that we host here at K-State, sometimes students have asked, well, I gave a presentation at a conference recently, or I have one coming up. Can I give that same presentation here? Yes and no. You may cover the same project or work that you're presenting. I know it's not uncommon in the professional world that you're usually expected to not go to professional conference 1, 2, and 3 and present the exact same presentation at each event. That you should be giving different. For our events here, we kind of have the same expectation. If you present at Research in the State and K-Grad, don't give the exact same presentation. We expect you should be having at least some new data, some new results that you might share from one semester to the next. But considering the other events you might be attending, you can present the same work, but it needs to again be shaped differently, presented differently to be tailored to the different audience. So how do you do that? One part here we'll talk about is how do you capture the interest of your audience? So when you're presenting at an event like Research in the State, we have a very diverse audience. Those individuals might not have the same level of interest in your work as you do, or as other students and faculty when you go to National Association of Agronomers. I don't know, that's probably not a real thing, I'm just using Andy as an example, but is it okay? Or chemists, or whatever your discipline is, they are going to have that discipline specific knowledge. So Andy had mentioned earlier using a specific term that for her is everyday language. When you're talking with other agronomers, then agronomers or agronomists? Agronomists. Then that may be common language to them too, but I'm not an agronomist, nor an agronomer. So if you use that term with me, I'm like, what is she talking about? This doesn't sound very interesting to me. So you've got to one way to think about this is using a hook. A hook is something that will capture your audience attention, pull them in. So start by talking about communicating the work in a way that would get them to think about why they should care, or how can your work relate to something that your audience might be familiar with or interested in. Another way to approach it is by telling the story. You're thinking of kind of three main components of your presentation: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Getting the big picture of what is the problem or the question that my work is addressing, not the 10 different questions, because your work is probably addressing a number of questions, but what is the one big question you want to focus on in this presentation? What are you doing to study that question, to help find an answer to that question? And then what have you found? Or maybe what if you don't have to be completely done with all your work yet. What have you found so far? And what are the implications of those findings? Why is that important? Why should we care about what you found? How does that tie back to the beginning, to that why should we care? How does this relate? So again, then bring it back to how does this relate to my audience? How does it relate to something that they are interested in, or something they should care about? I kind of alluded to this just a moment ago, but avoiding those tiny details. So again, focusing on kind of the big picture, the theme of your work overall, or just focusing on one project that you're working on. You don't have to present a full thesis. You don't have to give all the details. I think Tucker kind of touched on this too in the clip I just shared as well, that you don't have to go into the nitty-gritty details that your major professor, the faculty in your department might ask you about in terms of the methodology of your work or the statistical analyses that you're using. Because again, partly because that may be very discipline specific, but you just need to share enough that your audience will get the big picture, the gist of what you're doing. And with that, be concise, maintain your attention, and show your excitement for what you're doing, because that helps grab attention too, right? If you seem like, well, here I'm doing this stuff and this is what it's about and here's how I look at it, as opposed to I'm really doing this really exciting work right now that's addressing this huge problem that affects a lot of people. I'd really like to tell you about it today. showing your excitement. If you're not excited, then why should your audience be excited, right? So then how do you tailor to your audience? We've kind of touched on this a little bit too already, as far as using language that your audience is not familiar with. And Andy noted that was it wasn't something that just came immediately to her to know, oh, this is a word that I cannot use because it's not something that everybody is familiar with. That can be challenging. I think that especially the further you get into your research, it can be more difficult because those concepts and terms become just everyday language for you, right? So it's hard for you to, or can be challenging for you to identify what language needs to be changed or needs to be framed differently. So you have to really kind of step into your audience's shoes and look at your presentation from their lens to see what might not make sense to them. Another way to think about it is if you can step back into your own shoes, go back in time and think about when you first got into your area of study as a grad student, or if you're in the same field that you were in as an undergrad. There were certainly some terms and concepts that you had to get familiar with, right? Our area of study is not something that we were born into, that we knew everything right away. What terms or concepts were unfamiliar to you, and it took time for you to learn, that you might have needed a few different ways to have explained to you? If you didn't understand them right away, then someone else who is new to this language will also need some explanation. Practice with a target audience in advance. So we're very used to practicing in our own departments with our peers and faculty when we have a presentation coming up, but find some other students. So if you have friends in other disciplines, especially if it's something very different from your own, find a time to connect with them and say, hey, can I practice this presentation with you? And then please give me feedback. What part of it does not make sense? Are there words that I use that you've never heard or would need a definition? So find a sample audience in advance and test it out with them. But as you're going through this process and identifying language that maybe needs to be replaced or explained differently, you have to find this nice balance of making sure you don't oversimplify, because you want to still demonstrate that the work that you're doing is challenging. It's because you all got into grad school, it was a selective process, right? There's a lot of work that goes into the work that you're doing. So you want to still, at some level, communicate the complexity of the work that you're doing without making it too complex for your audience to understand. As you're examining the language that you're using in your presentation and communication of your research, a couple of approaches to reframing your work or using different language is to use technical terms as needed. So there might be some words where there's really just no replacement for this. So still use it as you need to, but include a definition just to help explain what that word means or that concept means. Another approach that I've heard before that I think is very helpful to limit the cognitive load on your audience is to give the definition first. So first use language that they can understand, explain it, and then use the concept. So in my work, I use this process that involves such and such, and using words that your audience can understand. Maybe there is a discipline specific term for that method that you're using, and then say this in my work, this is called whatever it is. So that's just a way that helps, because if you use a term that they don't know, they might stop, and as you continue talking, they're trying to process what that word is. Is that something that you know before? Trying to figure it out, and they're thinking about this as you're explaining to them what it is. Again, whereas if you first use language to provide a definition that they can understand, and then tell them what that definition is referring to, then they're not using all that time to try to think about what that word means. And with your presentation, so there's two big parts of a poster presentation, right? You're orally presenting your work, but you also have a key visual component, your poster itself. I would say your oral presentation carries a little bit more weight than your poster. So a few of you said you've given poster presentations before, so I'm guessing you've been to poster presentations as well, have gone and interacted with someone else who is presenting the poster. When you've done that, how often did you actually go through and read every detail on the person's poster?
Never.
You're probably usually more focused on just listening to what they're saying, right? Maybe they have some graphs or very visual components that you're looking at as they're talking about that part of it. But you can't read all of the text as they're speaking to you. You might do that if the presenter is not at their poster, then you might read through it, but as they're presenting to you, you're not going to read through every word on the poster, even after they present, right? So your poster, again, does not really carry as much weight as your oral presentation. Because if someone comes over and you're not prepared to explain it, then they're gonna have to read through everything. So that's why it's very important to be very well prepared to orally present your poster. So how do you prepare for that? One great way is to start by putting it in writing. Write out your spiel for your poster, so you have something you can refer back to practice from. You might take the approach of starting with maybe too much and refining. Again, as I mentioned before, avoid those details, which is also difficult to do. As the more knowledge you get, the more experience you get with your research, it's difficult to identify what you don't need to say. So it might be easier for you to start with a lot and then see, you write something out, practice it, see how long that's taking you. It took me 7 minutes to get through this. I don't have 7 minutes to talk at my poster. So go through it and see, well, what could I take out that the talk would still make sense and would still give my audience a good overview of what I'm doing. And just continue to do that until you refined enough that you're within about 3 minutes. And as you do that, make sure that you are reading that out loud to yourself, because your pace of presenting, if you just read that silently to yourself, you're probably going to get through it a lot faster than if you read it out loud to yourself or to somebody else. As you practice that, and maybe especially once you get to the stage where, okay, I've got a very good draft of what I want to say, I've refined it so it's only a few minutes long, then you might want to practice by recording yourself presenting, which I know can probably be very uncomfortable. We don't like to watch ourselves talk and present, but that's a great way to, I think, to catch anything that you're saying that maybe you have a sentence that runs on way too long, or maybe you're doing something awkward physically. You constantly have your hand in your pocket and you're juggling your keys, or you're pacing too much, or you're not moving around enough and you're like a statue. So that's why recording yourself may be helpful, just to assess those parts of your talk. So I'm going to turn back to our presenters from last year. And I know Andy and Tucker talked a little bit about this already, but we'll have you talk about how did you tailor your presentation to your audience?
Okay, move up there, sure. So yeah, the way that I look at poster presentations and what Megan said is really true, is it's actually an oral presentation, it's a meeting oral presentation. So to avoid, I don't really like posters full of text. When I'm walking around and like looking at posters, I like pictures. And when you're passing by, you're gonna have dozens of other posters around you. So probably the ones that are gonna catch your attention are the ones with great pictures of visual representation. So my number one tip would be work on the visuals of your poster so you can catch the attention of people that are passing by. And also be approachable. Sometimes you've probably seen that already, but when you're walking by and the person does not want to talk to you, they look to the ground, they leave. And that might happen for so many reasons, and that's okay. Like some people don't like talking to other people, and that's understandable. But if you really want to engage with your audience, be approachable. So if I'm next to a poster, I'll be smiling. I'll be like, hey, do you want to talk about fungi? I can talk to you about fungi. Like I would pass the message that if they want to talk to me, I'll be happy to talk to them. So I believe that it's important too. And the way that I look at a poster presentation is like I'm talking to a friend after coming back from a vacation. The poster would be the photos that I will be showing my friend. Imagine you just came back from New York City, you're talking to your best friend, you're not gonna write a statement and put them to read, and you're gonna be standing right next to them without saying anything. That's awkward. So they're to support your talk, not the opposite. So you're gonna be there talking and you can show them your graphs, you can show them the pictures. The poster is there just to give them more details. So if I'm telling my mom or my friend that I went to the Empire State Building, I'm not gonna be reading what I did in there. I know what I did, I was there. So that's the same for your research, you know what you did, you know what you found. You don't need to read it word by word. Just tell them like you're telling a friend, so this is what I did, this is what I found. And show the pictures in your poster as a way to support your arguments. So this is usually what truly helps me. And honestly, nobody's there to negatively judge you. And we learn every time we present a new poster. You're always gonna learn something. I know we can get nervous when people that we don't know approach us, but that's totally fine. We're actually having fun, we're learning from them too. So just tell them what you did, what you found, and use the visuals as a friend for that. Am I diverging from the question?
No,
I forgot what the question is. But yeah, my preparation is, I really like to know what I'm gonna talk about. And for us grad students, we're usually the ones responsible for carrying out our studies. So we know it, we know what we did. So just make sure that you know your data. You don't need to give them all the details that you would not give your parents, for example. You can translate that in a more relatable manner. You don't have to go deeply into statistics or like bring complex graphs that they would have to stare at that for 10 minutes to understand. So make sure that you make it simple, but not trivial. Making it simple does not mean that it's not relevant or trivial. Just show them that you can translate that to them and it still can sound interesting and important too. What was the question again?
Yes, how do you make your research more understandable to a broader audience?
Okay, yes. So that's what I was talking about before. Like I try to talk like I'm talking to a friend. You don't need to be nervous when you're telling your friend something that happened to you. So that's the same for research. So if you know that there are some details that are really hard to be translated, give it a second thought and try to figure out how you would tell your parents about that, or your grandma, your grandpa. And that really helps. That becomes more relatable for your audience. think I covered everything. I like talking, you probably know something. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, I'll be right here.
And let's see, cover it.
Just gonna.
Realizing what's important to share and what's not to share. My research was focused around different grain inclusions in aquatic-based feeds. So I realized very early on that if I spent too much time talking about deep nutritional theory or anything like that, people aren't going to understand. So I looked at my research and I just tried to come up with what are the three or a few main points that I want people to take away from this. And the first one was that this is the grain that I chose, and this is why I chose to do it. This was the aquatic species that I'm researching. In my case, it was tilapia, and that was because it's a very economically large business, a lot of money spent on it. And then the third one is, why is this important? So if you can kind of narrow it down and ignore all of the stuff that people in your field care about and just tell the average person why they should care about this, what are the facts about your research that the average person is going to care about, that's what you should focus on your presentation, and that is inherently going to make it more understandable to the general public. How did you make your poster and presentation stand out? And this is, again, it's the same thing. If you put up a poster that has, in-depth statistical analysis, the average person is not going to understand that. If you put up a poster that is just covered in paragraphs of text or paragraphs of analysis, the average person is not going to understand that. You need to look at your poster in the same way that you look at a photograph. It needs to be appealing to the eye, and it needs to be appealing in the eye. It needs to appeal to the general audience, not to a scientific audience. This is a scientific presentation. Don't get me wrong. You don't want to take the science out of it, but your judge could be somebody from English or somebody from the engineering department. So you don't know who your judge is going to be. And later on, when you go present, if you win this and you present at the Capital Graduate Research Summit, your audience is legislators. They don't understand any of this. You need to make it. The first and foremost thing is your poster has to be attractive to the eye. It has to make somebody want to stop and look at it. So a lot of graphs, a lot of photos, a lot of charts, things along those lines, things that illustrate your data very plainly, in a different way than a table might. Somebody can't look at it and read p-values or read, whatever data you collect. A scientist in your field can look at that and read it and understand what it's saying, but a general person cannot. So, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example on this on mine. So one of the main things that we do is for aquatic feed, we measure water stability, which is the ability of the feed pellets to retain its mass in water after you feed it. A high water stability correlates to a high level of pollution, or a low water stability correlates to a high level of pollution, and vice versa. So when I talked about it, when I put it on my poster, I did not really talk about water stability at all. I always related it back to the ability of the feed to be used and not pollute its environment, because that is something that the average person cares about. And so that
I really like that last example he gave, again, tying it back to how does your audience relate to it? So as he's saying, he doesn't have to use the technical terminology in his field of high or low water stability, but what is that impacts pollution? And we can all understand what pollution means, right? That's something that a broader audience can really understand, and they don't really need a lot of other discipline-specific knowledge to comprehend what he's doing.
And also another thing that I forgot to mention is that you're probably gonna know this when you have someone evaluating you, because you have a spreadsheet, they're gonna be writing. But make sure that you treat the general audience the same way that you treat your evaluators, because they are seeing that too. So sometimes we see examples like if you see people approaching you with a spreadsheet, you're gonna be nicer to them than you would for like someone else who's just walking by. So that is also part of how you present. I don't know if they evaluate that, but I would. If I was an evaluator, I definitely would.
And that, thanks for pointing that out, Andy, for specifically for the events we coordinate here for research in the state and K-Grad. The judges will have, we're trying to change things up this year. We might be a little bit more tech advanced, so they might not necessarily clipboard. We'll have a name tag that will have their name. We included their department or whatever their affiliation is at K-State. So that will immediately help you know a little bit as well. We typically, you would probably have at least one judge that's in a unit broadly related to your own. So Andy's in agronomy, she might not necessarily have a judge from agronomy, but maybe from horticulture or grain science, another discipline in the college bag. But the other judges may be from somewhere very different, so you'd be able to know like, oh, well, I'm in an agriculture discipline and I have a faculty member from art who is now visiting my poster. How do I talk to them about my research? So that may help, but if there are other members of the public visiting your poster, they may not have a name tag on, you may have to just ask them. Who are you? Are you a student, faculty? What's your area of research? You can certainly have that interaction with your visitors first to learn about what's their background, so you know how much they might already know about your area of research.
Can I add something else?
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I did last year that I really liked was, and it was a recommendation from people that presented before me, that to get my business card ready. Sometimes you make really good connections that you can use in your professional career or academic career based on the poster. So if you meet a professor and you want to keep in touch with that professor, you can give them your card. And sometimes we get overwhelmed if we don't add all the info that we need on the poster. And sometimes someone from my area would show up and ask. So what I usually do is use a QR code. So I only add the most relevant results to the poster. But if someone from statistics, for instance, shows up and asks me, how is your statistics looking like? I would scan my QR code and show them my ANOVA table and all the models that I use. So you can have that information. It's still ready for you in case you need to access it. You don't need to memorize any of that, but it doesn't need to be printed in your poster right away. So this is something that I usually do and that helped me a lot. It might help you guys too.
That's great advice, because you're limited on your space on your poster, right? You don't want to make it too cramped, which we're getting into in this slide. So you might want to have your contact info, but that's a great idea to have a business card ready. And the QR code's a great idea too for in my day as a grad student, we'd have printouts of our poster. I don't know how common that is now still, but you might have a printout of your posters for people to take, but you could also just have a QR code that people could scan to get a digital copy of your poster. I've seen variations in terms of like, do I need to include references on my poster? You should give credit to work that you're citing. I know when I was a grad student and I was making posters, I would not put the references on my poster, like a bibliography listing, but I would take printed handouts of my poster, and then on the back side of those handouts, I would have my references. So I'm not using up space on the poster to list references, but yet certainly still use in-text citations as appropriate. But so great segue in terms of the poster design. So we've talked a lot about the oral presentation, which again is the key component of your presentation. But what about the poster design itself? So one question might be, do I have to follow a specific format? Typically for poster sessions, there's not a required format you have to follow. again, other than there's usually some size dimensions you have to stick with. We do not have a specific layout for you to follow for research in the state if you're participating. We may be sharing a sample template soon. With that, I would strongly recommend you make it clear what, and this is pretty standard, I think, having a poster title, who are the authors for that project, your affiliations for the authors. But with this event as well, because you may then be going to the Capitol to share your research, you want to make it clear that you are affiliated with K-State. So using the K-State word mark or logo for the university or for your department would be great. So that it's very clear at the Capitol that you are, and it naturally will be anyhow, because we usually have all of the K-State students set up together, we can talk together, etc. But that just helps make it very clear that you're a student at K-State. With the design, a good piece of advice is to make sure your text is readable from about a few feet away. You know, your audience shouldn't have to get up here to read the text, but especially if there are a number of people visiting the poster, so that if they're standing about here, they could still easily read the poster. And with that, I'll skip down to a couple bullet points on the slide. Avoid using too much text, as has been mentioned already. That ensures that you don't have to make your text teeny tiny. Your poster should have a nice logical flow and clearly defined sections. So it should be clear that, oh, this is some background information, this is the methodology, here's what they found, and it should be organized in a way that people can follow that storyline. Make your most important content stand out, and those would typically be your results, right? That's the background, it's important, but people aren't here to learn about what other research led into your work. They want to know what you found. The outcome is the great part of what you're sharing, right? So make that really stand out. In terms of color, images, graphs, be careful with color. I think the best practice is having a white or light colored background with black or dark colored text, black or dark colored text. Images and photos can help make your work relatable or understandable. So if there's a product or something real world relatable that your work can have an impact on, maybe have an image of that on your poster, something that again can pull people in, that will make them want to learn about what are you doing that relates to this photo that you have on your poster. Keep graphs and charts simple. So going back to what Andy noted about, well, if a statistician comes by, I can pull up all of my statistical graphs and we can get technical in there, but simplify those items on your poster so that, again, people don't have to take a lot of time to think through it and digest, but so that they can look at it and within a few seconds they can see, oh, this is the trend that they're finding, or this is the outcome. I can see this clear difference between this group and this group, or between this application or intervention that they're using and their control. So you don't have to give all the detail that you would probably include when you're, again, presenting to faculty in your department. And the last note I have on here is your pretty poster is nice. It can be eye-catching, but is it digestible? Can people comprehend what you're doing? So again, yeah, having something that is visually appealing is great to have to make sure you have that balance of having it be interpretable. So next I have a few examples of some posters that we can talk about and see what and I'm calling for participation here to share what is going well in this poster and what is probably not so great about this poster.
Well, there are lots of text.
Lots of text,
Again.
yeah,
tiny text.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
Lots of tiny text and it's too flashy.
too fun. So it's, yeah, it is kind of eye catching, right? So first we'd be like, oh. But maybe a little bit too much, yeah.
No figures.
No, yeah, it is just a lot, so it's, there's nothing that stands out right away to say, oh, this is research found. Anything else?
There's so many colors.
So many colors, yes. Again, it makes it eye catching, but it's a little bit too much.
I wouldn't add an abstract. Acknowledgements this big, like I would maybe put a logo or something and
Yes.
not the references either, because you need to use your space wisely.
Mhm. That, yes, so that is a question I've had sometimes is, do I need to put an abstract in my poster? My answer is no. To me, a poster kind of is, it's a big abstract in itself, right? So why are you gonna summarize something that's already, this is significantly summarized from a paper? So why would you add another summary of your summary? So yeah, don't waste your space on an abstract. I think one thing that kind of works well, the sections are very clear. Other than having just all kinds of color and background and stuff going on, but there's these very clear boxes, nice big headers. The other ones, it's very busy. How about this one?
Lots of text too, lots of text.
I mean, I can't even read this up here because it's so great.
And a large space just for references.
The graphs are not exactly well aligned there, the one with the pictures, seems a little bit off there.
There's no bigger caption, so.
There's a discussion section. I would use a conclusion section instead of a discussion, because you're there to discuss with your audience.
So I have a question
Mhm.
this way. Here the presenter is trying to show it's the results of the research through the graphs, right?
Mhm.
But I can't suppose that every audience would be able to understand that graph or not.
Yes.
That is understandable for me. So what should I do in that case? Like, how do I present my data or what I did
Mhm.
and what I got after the data analysis?
Yeah, you might just have to take a different approach to making your graphs, so. Some graphs like this might be produced by the statistical software that you're using. So you might have to take a different approach to creating graphs, and we might see some examples in another slide or two. To make it clear, to very clearly show where you're finding differences or no differences or effects. So yeah, you might not be able to rely on the software that you maybe normally would to create graphs or charts that would be very appropriate for a manuscript you're submitting to a journal in your field of study. You just have to take a different approach to creating those visual components. Yes.
Is it necessary to put references blocks here? Because I don't think so. Anyone who will come to see our research or somebody kind of thing would be interested in references. So
Yeah, so that, yeah, again, and I think Andy noted this too, it's taking a pretty significant chunk of the poster. You know, if it was like 1 or 2 at the bottom, that wouldn't be so much space, but yeah, you don't have to put references on the poster.
1 or 2 should be there or nothing should be there.
So it might depend, again, if you probably shouldn't have a lot of references. Anyhow, you wouldn't have a lot of background information, which is most of your references would be cited in background or literature area. You might have some in your methods, so maybe there's a specific methodology you're using that you obtained from another source that you need to reference. But also there's a lot of text on here too, so there's also a lot more to pull from. To have references to cite on this poster. Again, some options for sharing your references without putting them on your poster, or to maybe just have we talked about QR codes earlier. You might have like, check out my references and have a QR code just for your references. You can have a printed handout that has your references on there, so you're not utilizing so much poster space for references. So,
I have a question.
yes.
So for the figures, do we have to usually have captions or not have captions at all?
You should have enough information on there that would explain the figure, so that if someone does just look at that figure, they have enough information there. So yeah, maybe a caption, having axes labeled, lines or bars identified for what they're representing. And yes, I think a simple caption to explain what that figure is for.
Because usually like in manuscripts, we would have like figure 1, 2, and then we would explain what each of those figures really mean. But like in posters, do we need to have those figure 1, 2, all of them numbered and then have like a short caption, or don't have them numbered at all? Or maybe have
Yeah, if you have multiple, so if you're referencing those figures in some text that you have on your poster.
or just talking, like if you're just gonna like explain it to the audience, do we still need to have those?
Yeah, I think you should still have some a caption that explains that figure. Again, so that if when you are at a poster session, you might not necessarily be at the poster the whole time, so that if someone does stop by and just looks at the poster, they can still interpret what those figures mean.
I can show you some examples on my poster later, because I have the same question as you.
Yeah, and also the other question is, like this poster right here, it has a section for purpose. So like, and it's obviously all texty, but would it be helpful for us to have figures under the purpose session? Do we need to have a purpose session? Do we not? Wait, is it not necessary?
So it might not necessarily be, you might not use the label purpose, but I think something that introduces the focus of your research. So purpose, hypotheses, goals, aims, why. So getting at the why are you doing this? What is the goal of your research? But it also probably does not need to be spelled out in paragraphs of this detail. It might be like a couple bullet points, or a sentence or two, or a research question with maybe a very brief explanation.
So I have a question. So we can make our titles in our own way, right? We don't need to like go through the like results. Do we need to like go through like methodology, results, or can we go with like iconic titles that we make?
For like the different sections.
Yes, different sections.
Yeah, we don't have a requirement for our events, and yeah, I think typically for other poster events, they're not gonna say you have to use these headers for your different sections. Yeah, there are variations of words, so like this one, Indy noted, they have discussion. You're gonna have a discussion with the person, conclusions or impacts, findings would probably be in your results. But there could be other words or phrases you would use that are getting at the same thing, that might be a little more engaging for the audience. Yeah. So yeah, like materials and methods, you could change to something readable, like how did we study it, or here's what I did. Yeah, maybe wouldn't use those terms for a professional poster conference. I think the words here they're understandable, they're relatable. You don't have to explain what do you mean by results. That's pretty clear, but yeah, there's flexibility with what you use for those different section headers. Yeah.
Earlier on, you made mention about using phrases to tailor like some terminologies depending on your audience.
Mhm.
So in like the sciences, there are some terminologies that it's very difficult to like paraphrase or to just break down. So for example, maybe use some bioinformatics or like some genomic terminologies that are difficult to break down for maybe like audience. So how do you tailor those in those instances? How would you explain to them?
Yeah, so again, you can still use some of those more discipline specific terms, you might just have to explain to them what that means. But with that, as you're preparing your presentation, if you're struggling, so you give the example of bioinformatics, like, I don't know, what's bioinformatics, how else do I explain this? Then have a discussion with your major professor, your PI, say, well, you know, how do I explain to people who are not doing this work what that means? So find maybe, again, that's where it's helpful to talk with other people or practice with people who are not familiar with your research to see, do they know what this means? Is this something you really have to take time to explain? Again, I think it's nice to sometimes use some of that terminology, which Andy alluded to as well, so that you're not trivializing your work. You're still demonstrating the complexity and that's involved in the work that you do, but you still have to find ways to explain what that means if it's something that they don't know. But yeah, your major professor, faculty can be a great resource too, as well. Yeah, how do we talk about this to people outside of our discipline? How would I explain to them what this means?
And today we have a resource that we didn't have last year that we should use, AI. We have AI now for free. So if you have trouble finding ways to better explain, you can use that as a tool. So you can go to AI and be like, hey, you can literally talk to them like, hey, this is my topic. I'm struggling to present this in a relatable manner. How would you explain this to my 60-year-old grandma? They would give you something good. So why not use that as a resource, right?
Yeah, great tip, yes, and as a tool,
As a tool.
not, hey, AI, please make this poster for me, but yes, use it as a resource. And the K-State libraries, they are doing a ton of work in that area right now. They have a number of presentation sessions, workshops, webinars that they're really getting on the topic of AI and how, yes, partly addressing how can you use this as a tool, how do you use it appropriately so that you're still doing your own work, but you can use it as a resource to support your work that you're doing. So if you haven't seen any of those or heard about them, check out the library's site to look at those events they're doing. So here's another example. What do you guys all think about this one compared to the other two?
I like it.
No, I like it, but I feel like I like it, but the text is like too small. It's better if the text is a little bigger, but I still.
I think the presenter's information is missing in the poster.
Yeah, and this was just, I don't know that this was a real poster, or I may have blocked out there. I don't think this was from someone from here. But yes, you should certainly have below your title, author information.
My other issue is with the color gradient in the middle for the results. Someone with maybe color line, it's maybe difficult.
Are you talking about this
Yeah,
part here,
Yeah.
or even these? Yeah, maybe using some colors that are, there's a stronger difference. But yeah, I agree. I would maybe avoid, it's overall simple, yes, much less condensed than the last two. I think you can get through it more quickly and get an idea of what they're studying. Yeah, maybe tone down the use of color a little bit. But here, yeah, I think this is a good example of a very simple graph where you have a title that. So you may not even have like a full caption, but if the title at least clearly explains what variables you're looking at, what the relationship is. Yeah. And you can see they're not even really using paragraph format. They've got bullet points under each section. So you might have full sentences in your bullet points, but avoid having these lengthy paragraphs.
About the number of columns, it seems that they use like 3 in general. Is it okay to use a 4 columns sometimes? Cause you know, if you put too much information in there, then it feels like it's a little bit crowded there.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if it's like your 4 columns would be okay too.
You might have to play around with that. I think 3 is pretty common.
Okay.
I think just if you have a 4th one, the columns might start getting a little too tight. Yeah.
Okay.
But you can, play with it digitally and see how does it look. Oh, yeah, but now I'm getting like 6 words on a line and it just needs to be squished.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always a little worried about there, like if too many columns, they're probably not going to
Yeah.
pay attention to much there, so.
Yeah. And here's just a layout example I'd like to share. Earlier I talked about you making that most important content stand out. This is just an idea you can use that I think we have this as an example on the Research in the State website. The idea is, again, focusing on your findings, your results. So this kind of ties into what you're sharing as far as could I have a 4th column? In a way, this is like having the space of 4 columns. You've made the 2 side columns not as wide and using more space in the middle. This layout also uses the idea of a QR code concept where you might have very brief information on your poster, again, so that it's just very easily digestible by your audience who's there, but that they can scan a QR code and maybe that takes them to more a bit more detail about your research. And just a few more tips on the oral presentation. So we talked about the content of your oral presentation, but physically when you're presenting, you want to make sure you're speaking loudly, clearly, especially at a poster session, as opposed to a talk where you're the only person hopefully talking in the room. At a poster session, there's many other people presenting and talking, lots of noise around you. So you've got to be able to speak loudly and clearly. Making sure you're not speaking too fast or too slow, that you're taking too much time. Make eye contact with your audience. I mentioned before, making sure you're not moving around too much or standing like a statue or doing other distracting or awkward things physically. Okay, I'm gonna skip over this part because we kind of covered that earlier. One other point that Andy kind of got into, and I think I did it as well, in terms of professionalism. So the poster session can be a little bit more casual than a talk, because you're just having conversations with people, but also some key professionalism points to keep in mind. Offer to present your poster to someone when they come up. So don't just stand there and wait for them to say, hey, can you tell me about what you're doing? But when they come up, introduce yourself. Again, you might ask them if you don't know who they are. Oh, who are you? Are you a student here? Are you faculty? What's your background of research? Would you like me to walk you through my poster?
Sometimes they don't want to, and that's okay. It's nothing personal. Sometimes they just want to walk by, take a look and leave. So you gotta read your audience too.
Yeah.
If they want to talk to you or not.
Yeah.
Just let them know that you are approachable, but they're also welcome to take their time. Like, scan on your poster, it happened to me before.
Yes, and we especially see that at the Capitol event with legislators, they're in the next meetings and they just might not have time to.
Cause if they see that you are attacking everything that passes by, they have more earphones. So they don't have to interact with you.
I've shared earlier with the events we host here at K-State, we want these to mimic an event you'd experience at a major professional conference, so treat it like that. Dress professionally, you never know who's gonna be stopping by to visit your poster. Andy shared she's made some connections at poster events that she still has, so dress professionally, but also make sure you're comfortable because you'll be standing for a couple hours, maybe more. So make sure you're wearing something that's comfortable for you, that you'll still feel comfortable and can feel confident in giving your presentation. Take time to network with other presenters too, so you'll have the opportunity to network with people who are visiting your poster, but especially if there's downtime and there's not as much traffic around, interact with the other presenters around with you, learn about what they're doing, and just to learn about the other work that's going on at the university and what other peers are doing. We have a number of resources on our website to help you in preparing for research in the state, other research forums that we host here at K-State. Our Writing Center is an excellent resource if you're not familiar. Through the English department, we have a Writing Center that's here to support all K-State students. So as I mentioned before, when you're preparing your poster, you might write your spiel out in writing. If you're having difficulty getting your thoughts out on the paper, or you just want someone to work through this with, the Writing Center is a great resource for that. And I also talked about recording yourself. So we'll have Zoom today. You can easily just use a laptop or computer to record yourself on Zoom. If you don't have such a device, or if you want something different, in Hale Library in the Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab, they have a one-button studio. So it's, as it says, you go in, I think you still have to take a USB drive if you want to capture your recording. But there's one button to start it, it records you, so it just gives you maybe a little bit better space and more advanced technology to get a good audio and visual capturing of your recording. And of course, practice a lot. Again, on our own, get feedback from other people, especially those who are not familiar with your work. And first, since we're getting towards the end of time, I just want to share a couple more samples, and you'll have Indy if she's still willing to share her.
Yeah, if you can just show some details, because I need to run from the seminar.
I'm just going to show I reached out to some of last year's winners from research in the state to see, could you be here? If you can't, could you share your poster? So this was from Lindsay Howard. She is in the couple and family therapy program. So you can see she's kept hers very simple, very nice headings, so you can easily see her sections. So she's not following a 3-column structure, but I think she has such minimal text and very large headlines for her sections that it's clear what those sections are for. Again, keeping things very, very simple, not overusing color or anything that's too distracting. This was Tucker's, who we heard from on the recordings. So he kind of followed that format that I shared earlier with making your middle section a little larger and focusing on the findings of your work. And these side columns a little bit simpler. I think he did note in the last clip we saw from him that he did get some feedback that he maybe had a little bit too much text on his poster. Yeah, I think maybe the graphs might have been maybe a little bit too heavy on the graph usage. Maybe could have been a little bit more simplified, but again, focusing on the outcomes there in his poster. And then we have Indies, so if you wanna talk a little bit, again, you don't necessarily have to give your whole spiel, but if you wanna point out some things from your strategy for your poster.
Of course. And this was my first poster ever, so today I would do it differently. Every time we present, we learn more. So one thing that I really like is showing pictures. So an important part of my results is that based on the morphology of the fungi, I could tell them apart. So I used soils from Konza Prairie and soils from agricultural fields. And I wanted to look at the fungal communities and how they would accept us adding another fungi that would help climate change mitigation. So I wanted to show people that the natural fungi from the prairie looks different from the introduced one, even though they're very similar. The species are very closely related. So I added the pictures here. My graphs that I usually use for scientific presentations, they're much more complex than that, but I wanted to translate that on bar graphs. So it would be approachable and relatable for the general audience. So if you scan, it's probably not going to be there right now because I changed my QR code, but if you scan my QR code, it would take you to the other graphs. So here I just presented data on mycorrhizal colonization. That's the type of fungi that I was working with. But if they scan my QR code, they would be able to see the methods, the step-by-step of what I did, the other graphs, the other results, the statistic analysis, relevant papers, videos on YouTube on how the fungi propagates in the soil. So in my relevance or introduction part, I put a large picture to show that when they add my fungi to the soil, they expand the root system. So I didn't need to read what I wrote here. So when people would stop by my poster, they would know that with my fungi, we would have much more roots than without the fungi. The same for my results. I put some balloons with what I wanted to show with my graphs. So when they look at my results, they can either look at the graph and interpret that, or they could look at this small purple ball that says AMF inoculant enhanced AMF colonization in the early stages. So I already brought the interpretation. So if the person wanted to know what I was talking about, they could quickly look and understand what I said.
And then, sorry if I can interrupt quickly, Amy, these are essentially captions, kind of,
Yes.
right, for your, so getting back to that question, but I think the way you've done that visually stands out more than what the typical format we see for captions with figures, so that really draws the eye to say, this is what this graph is about.
Yeah, so if it was today, I would even reduce more the text. But I tried just to focus on the essential information, and I was using like bold and sometimes highlighting the words that were important for people. So if they were passing by, it would catch their eyes. They would be like, oh, prairie soil, colonization, Konza, that might be interesting. Let me read about that. So my methodology, the first draft of my poster, it was a huge chunk of tests for methodology. And I was like, not going to present that. So I drew by hand because I didn't know that we can get pictures from Google too, but I wasn't sure for copyright purposes. So I just drew with a regular pencil. The fertilizer that I'm using, I know the resolution is not good in here, but if you guys want to see the final version, feel free to email me, I can send it to you. My email is just my first name at ksu.edu, so you can see with more details. But I wanted to show that I had 2 types of inoculation and 2 types of fertilizers, with and without. For the without, I just put a big X on it. And I showed what are the types of soils that I used, how did I sample, and some pictures to show that it was a greenhouse study. I looked at roots. When I colored the roots, I put them in a microscope and they would give me those pretty pictures. So yeah, the QR code really helped, and bringing my business card also helped a lot. I became friends with people that were not even in the K-State community. There's a lady that we exchanged plant cuttings until today. We bring each other house plants, we love plants. So it's really good to make connections. But yeah, I try not to use a lot of different colors. I try to focus on the purple, especially like to represent K-State. In case I was selected to go to the Capitol, I wanted to show people that, hey, I'm K-State. I want to show you my work from K-State. And in my poster, instead of using the regular K-State logo, I used my lab logo, but it has K-State under it too. Do you guys have any questions about the poster? Sorry, I'm talking fast. I have seminars, so I might need to run. But do you guys have any questions on, oh, and you asked about captions, right? So I added captions just to those two pictures in case I was not near my poster. So people would look and understand what it means. But usually if you have great y-axis and x-axis, and all the info that you need is around your graph, you don't need to be writing a whole bunch of information. I think we're good, right?
Yeah.
So if you guys need help anytime, feel free to reach out. I'm truly happy to help. I had a lot of people helping me when I was beginning, so I would always be here if you guys need anything. So I can say a little bit more, but in 5 minutes I need to run for a seminar.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up here real quick too. I think maybe just a couple other things to point out with Andy's posters and example. Acknowledgements or using some kind of logo if your work is funded by a grant, if you're getting external support for your research. Something to definitely consult with your major professor on that. Who do we need to be acknowledging on here? Always run your presentation by your major professors and that's often their work as well, especially if it is funded on a grant that they received. If you do something like what this year is for offering a QR code to get to additional content on your research, also discuss that with your PR major professor. Again, if it's being grant funded or if your research is maybe involved in potential patenting, your PI might want to limit how much information you're sharing on your research if it's not at a stage where you really want to make everything public just yet. So discuss that with them as well. Yeah, any other questions? And there was, if we had time, I was gonna have you all practice a little bit. I don't want to keep you too long, but things to think about as you start working in your presentations. Take time to just, as Indy and Tucker both alluded to, just sit and chat with someone about your research. That's a good way to get started too. Maybe don't approach it by first trying to, okay, I need to write my background and my writing it all out. Maybe just think about how would I talk to someone if someone, stopped me on the street, or I'm out to eat or I'm out on a plane traveling to a conference and they say, what are you doing? Where are you going? And well, I'm going to this conference. Oh, what are you going to talk about? How would you casually explain to someone what's the main issue, question you're trying to address? How do you study it? What are the key methods you're using to study that question or hypothesis? And what are you finding? What are your key findings? Why is that important? Why should they care about it? So how would you explain it to your parents or a child, a younger sibling? That's definitely a good way, I think, to think about it, because kids are not going to understand a lot of the things you're doing. So how would you tell them about what you do? Any final questions from anyone here?
So can you send us this?
Yes, I can share the slides with all of you, and then we'll have the recording available as well. So, yeah. Right, well, thank you all and good luck with research in the state if you're presenting, or with any other presentations we'll have coming up this year.
QR code,